Now on BBC One, later than Build, Rita Chakrabarti with the BBC News.
Boris Johnson is set to announce a second national lockdown for England. New restrictions are expected to last until December, with schools and universities exempt. The latest scientific advice shows the second wave is set to be more deadly than expected unless further measures are imposed.
It's really clear that if we don't take action now, we will see those hospitalisations and deaths go up in a concerning way in the next few weeks.
It comes as the total number of UK cases since the pandemic began passes 1 million. Also tonight.
Bond. James Bond.
Sir Sean Connery, the very first screen James Bond, has died at the age of 90. Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Boris Johnson is expected to announce that from Thursday there'll be a new month-long lockdown across England that will last until the 2nd of December. Sources have told the BBC that restaurants and pubs will close, but takeaways and deliveries will be allowed. All non-essential retail will also close, but supermarkets are to stay open. Households will not be allowed to mix inside except for childcare and other forms of support. Unlike the first lockdown, schools, colleges and universities would stay open, while travel will be discouraged except for work. Here's our political editor, Laura Kunsberg.
Misery, the Prime Minister's own prediction of what a return to lockdown would feel like. But the instruction on its way again for the country to close its doors, after warnings of a second deadly wave of the virus from the government's own scientists. We expect the Prime Minister tonight to urge people in England again to stay at home, to close bars and restaurants from Thursday for a month. But this time, schools, colleges and universities will be allowed to stay open alongside essential shops. It's the last thing the government wanted to do, but this is what confronted the Prime Minister yesterday. Projections from several groups of scientists seen by the BBC of the number of people who could die each day if nothing changes. They vary and there are big margins of error, but one model even suggests a peak of well over 4,000 daily deaths. All of the projections are more serious than the current worst case scenario, shown here in black, and potentially dwarf the first wave in spring, shown here in blue as a comparison. And there are fears of the implications of that for the entire health service. This separate document suggests that within 10 days, capacity in the English NHS will be full in some parts of the country. And as the weeks progress, even if the Nightingale hospitals are all reopened and non-urgent care cancelled, the NHS will not be able to accept any more patients by Christmas week. And because any extra measures would take time to make a difference to the disease, the window to act is now for the majority of the country. The Prime Minister can't say he wasn't warned. The opposition, some of his own ministers and some of his own advisers were pushing for a limited lockdown many weeks ago now. But he chose instead to hold out under pressure from the Treasury and Tory backbenchers, choosing instead to try to keep the disease at bay with a patchwork effect, different regulations in different parts of the country, an effort to try to guard the economy too. But that judgment now looks like it was a political accident waiting to happen. There was always a risk this could happen again, but that doesn't make the reality any less painful for the public or less politically problematic for a Prime Minister who has spent weeks resisting and now is set to tell England at least to once again live life behind closed doors.
And Laura's with me now. Laura, we're still waiting to hear from Boris Johnson, but from what we do know, this is a big change of heart from him.
It is, and we shouldn't make any bones about this. The Prime Minister has time and again shown how reluctant he was to make this decision. He's resisted this also time and again, despite calls from his political opponents and some of his own advisers. But he has been trying to balance for the last couple of months those calls to act more swiftly to get the brakes on the disease with demands from business, from parts of his own party who've said, look, this isn't just about health. That's extremely important, but it's also about the impact of the economy, protecting people's jobs, and of course the impact to other services in the NHS that people rely on too. That's why he's been resisting a shutdown like this for so long. But we should also make clear, while there is a big sense of déjà vu, there are a couple of very important differences this time round. Schools, universities, colleges will stay open. That's a very different situation to March and April for millions of families. But the other very important difference is it's not at all clear that the other parts of the UK, the governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, will follow England's lead here. Now, that could leave us in a very difficult situation as a country. Lots of complexities that there weren't in the difficulties of March, April and those early days of lockdown. But there is also no question tonight, and we'll see how Boris Johnson chooses to express it in his own words. The government clearly here does leave themselves very open to the accusations that people told them they wouldn't listen, and he's been dragged and forced to act in the end in a position where they just don't have a choice.
And Laura, how is this going to go down with the Prime Minister's backbenchers who have been resisting this?
Well, there's definitely been a lot of unhappiness. We've heard through the day privately from some politicians, including some very senior MPs, who are really unhappy at how this has been handled, really unhappy about how it's emerged. There's a sense that actually Downing Street doing it like this, the press conference even tonight has been delayed. So there's unhappiness at the political handling of it. But I think that clearly the way the numbers are moving, those leaked documents that we've seen here at the BBC that show what the government now believes the disease could look like in just a matter of weeks if nothing is done, I think that may in the coming days change the balance of opinion over whether or not Boris Johnson really had a political choice. But don't forget there does have to be a vote this time. Back in early spring, the government just did this, they carried on, there was a huge degree of political consensus. It's a much scratchier, difficult atmosphere for the Prime Minister this time round.
Laura, thank you. Our political editor, Laura Kunsberg there. So what more do we know about the reasons for this move by the government? Our health correspondent, Catherine da Costa, has been looking at the statistics.
Many still exhausted, some still traumatised. NHS staff know what's to come. They're better prepared than in the spring, with more PPE, treatments and better understanding of the virus. But this time, hospitals are trying to keep other services running while seeing rising numbers of COVID patients. In April, there were nearly 20,000 patients with coronavirus in hospital across the UK. That dropped over the summer, but numbers have climbed to nearly 11,000. And with hospital admissions currently doubling roughly every fortnight, hospital leaders are worried.
We've been saying, and we've been saying it for about 3 or 4 weeks, that it's really important the government moves quickly and does tough lockdowns as quickly as possible, because otherwise the NHS won't have the capacity it needs.
The latest estimates show even with the tougher Tier 3 restrictions in parts of England, the epidemic's still growing, with between 50 and 100,000 new infections a day. And it's rising rapidly in the south. Health officials warn more hospital admissions and deaths will follow. It's all part of the data that's prompted a national lockdown.
We know there's economic damage. We know there's damage to people's well-being and mental health of long-term lockdown. But some kind of short, maybe 3 to 4 week national strategy to bring incidence down, allow time for test and trace to get to where it needs to be. And hopefully that will enable us to maybe relax a little bit over the winter period, over the Christmas period, and protect the NHS.
Locking down now will bring the virus under control to get through the winter and buy some time to develop mass testing, new treatments and an effective vaccine. Catherine da Costa, BBC News.
The latest government figures show that there were 21,915 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. There have now been more than 1 million cases of coronavirus in the UK. The average number of new cases reported per day in the last week is 22,522. And 326 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. It means on average in the past week, 259 deaths were announced every day. And it takes the total number of deaths so far across the UK to 46,555. Well, our health editor Hugh Pym is here with me now. And Hugh, we've now had more than 1 million cases of coronavirus in the UK. That's a sobering figure.
Yes, Rita, and even more so when you think that's doubled in just a month. Looking back to the end of August, it was about 1,000 daily reported cases each day in the UK. It's now more than 20,000. That just shows you how things have escalated. It really seemed to start with people coming back from holidays, school pupils and students getting back to go to wherever their education was. And many people said that was likely to happen. And as we've been hearing, government advisors did say late in September that it was escalating beyond what they were expecting and that action was needed, and that debate will continue. So this lockdown in England will aim to suppress those cases and bring them down. And of course, there are a lot more than those ones that I've just mentioned, because they only include people who've gone to be tested. There are many more out there, according to surveys, who don't know they've got it and don't have symptoms. But of course, sadly, there are people who've already got the virus who will become infected so seriously they'll end up in hospital, and some of them tragically won't survive. We already know that. That will continue to happen even during this month, because that is what is there in the trajectories that all the experts have been talking about. So more than 200 deaths a day could well get to 500. So the hope is that it'll bring the virus down and allow the test and trace system to work more effectively, certainly in England, in the weeks after the lockdown, assuming it's being eased. But that's a big ask of a test and trace system that hasn't performed particularly efficiently in recent weeks. One thing I should say, hospital treatment of those with COVID-19 has become more effective as doctors have learnt more about the virus. More people are surviving, having gone into intensive care. But certainly the NHS is going to be very busy in the weeks ahead.
Thank you very much. Hugh Pym there. Now, the prospect of a new national lockdown comes on the final day of the Treasury's furlough scheme, which has subsidised the wages of up to 9.5 million employees. The less generous job support scheme replaces it, and business leaders are warning that much more financial help will be needed from the government in the months ahead. Our business correspondent Katie Austin reports.
Today was a big date in businesses' diaries because the furlough scheme is closing. This lighting firm will use its replacement, the Job Support Scheme. Aimed at keeping workers in their jobs on reduced hours, it's less generous. The government will pay 62% of hours they're not working and the employer 5%.
We used to have 85 staff working in the two warehouses. We think we've only got enough work for about 25, but JSS means that we can actually keep 45 staff on working part-time.
There's a different version for firms forced to close by law because of restrictions. For them, the government will fund 2/3 of workers' wages. These schemes and other extended support were announced before a new lockdown was on the cards.
My heart sunk because it's devastating news for business.
To get through it, the boss of one hotel group told me a further support package will be needed.
Grants need to be reviewed. The furlough scheme really needs to be back to where it was in March, where we're covering 80% of our staff's wages. We really need those VAT and business rate relief extended for hospitality to come out of this crisis and recover over the number of years it's going to take to repay all the debt.
It's unsettling news too for this London beauty salon.
We had just started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the fact that we may have to lock down and close for however long is a real concern to us. You know, we still have to pay rent. I wasn't given a rent period, a holiday period for rent.
The British Retail Consortium says no shop should have to close.
It would be a disaster for us all as customers in the lead up to Christmas if part of the retail industry were forced to close as part of today's announcement. £1.6 billion a week of retail sales were lost in April, May and June, and that would be an even bigger figure with the consequences for jobs.
Business groups are calling for more support. The question now is whether that will be forthcoming from the Chancellor and how it would be paid for. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Up until now, the government has been committed to its three-tier system. Bradford was due to go into the highest tier on Monday. Our correspondent Lakshmi Gopal is there for us now. Lakshmi.
Well, Rita, tighter restrictions are nothing new in this part of the country. In fact, today it's exactly 3 months since parts of West Yorkshire, including Bradford, were first put into a local lockdown, reflecting the high infection rates in this area. Bradford is in the top 20 in England, and its rates are continuing to rise. And from Monday, the 2.3 million people across West Yorkshire will be moved into Tier 3. And some businesses have told me that those restrictions could push their livelihoods to the brink, let alone this new prospect of an England-wide full lockdown. After months of uncertainty and different rules to get their heads around, business owners now face yet another change.
The more I think about it, it's like writing a novel without having any ending to it. You try your best to survive in what we have to do, what you have to do. Unfortunately, we have some very mixed guidelines, and this is where the real confusion is, because I don't think businesses know really what they have to do.
People in Bradford were preparing for Tier 3 measures on Monday. Now they're bracing themselves for the prospect of full lockdown again.
I just think that, lots of people are going to struggle with it, mental health and financially, we
need to get a grip of this, so if that's what needs to happen, I'm all for it.
Is it really necessary? Do we really need to go into another national lockdown? Is it good for the economy? Do we really need to put everything on hold all over again?
Ishfaq runs 6 restaurants which have already lost around 30% of business under Tier 2, which banned households from mixing indoors.
We've lost a lot of business. Now if we go for another lockdown, it's just going to really cripple the business and everyone.
Months of restrictions have left some businesses here hanging by a thread, unsure if they can survive a winter of tougher lockdown. Lakshmi Gopal, BBC News, Bradford.
Let's have a reminder now of what restrictions are in place around the UK. In Wales, the 17-day firebreak lockdown, with people only able to leave their homes for limited reasons, continues. It's currently set to finish on November the 9th. Northern Ireland's First Minister Arlene Foster has said that the current tightened restrictions there will end as planned on the 13th of November. Pubs and restaurants have been closed, and schools, which will reopen on Monday, were closed for 2 weeks. Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has urged against all non-essential travel across the border with England. A new 5-level system of restrictions for tackling coronavirus will come into force in Scotland on Monday, which will see travel restrictions imposed on many Scots. Now, the James Bond star, Sir Sean Connery, has died at the age of 90. The first screen actor to play 007, it was a role that brought him global stardom and was followed by decades as one of Hollywood's leading actors. Our arts editor, Will Gompertz, looks back at his life.
Sean Connery was the first and, for many, the preeminent
Bond. James Bond.
With the inner snarl of Humphrey Bogart and the outward charm of Cary Grant, Connery created a charismatic screen legend, a ladies' man.
Looking for shells?
No, I'm just looking.
With a killer's instinct. He went from being a jobbing actor in his early 30s to an international movie star, an instantly recognisable global celebrity. The attention and fuss that came with the fame did not sit comfortably with the no-nonsense working-class Scot, who'd once been a milkman, a model and, briefly, a coffin buffer.
I had no awareness of that scale of kind of reverence and pressure and what have you. I never had a press representative or anything, and I found it a bit of a nightmare.
Bond was universally popular, but not with the man playing him. Connery felt trapped in 007's gilded cage. He wanted out, to test his talents with more challenging roles. He won plaudits for the man who would be king, playing alongside his old friend Michael Caine.
We've been all over India. We know her cities, her jungles, her jails and her palaces. And we have decided that she isn't big enough for such as we.
He won an Oscar for The Untouchables.
Want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way.
I suddenly remembered my Charlemagne. Let my armies be the rocks and the trees and the birds in the sky.
And won legions more fans in Indiana Jones. He was a proud Scot and a committed member of the SNP.
Came from humble beginnings, but through charisma, talent, sheer hard work, became one of the world's greatest actors. And, you know, his achievements are absolutely legendary. And I know that across Scotland today, we are mourning one of our best loved sons.
Tell me, Miss Trench, do you play any other games?
He will always be remembered for playing 007. But James Bond didn't make Sean Connery. Sean Connery made James Bond.
My name is Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
A movie icon established by an intelligent, versatile, exceptionally talented actor.
Sir Sean Connery, who's died aged 90. And we'll be back on BBC One with the full Downing Street news conference after the news where you are. But for now, goodbye.